Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got a ton going on here at Spirit Blade Productions and Christian Geek Central, including our in-depth Bible study for geeks, movie, game, and other entertainment reviews or commentary, live streams, Christian geek news, original audio dramas, and tons more. And on top of all that, you can become a Spirit Blade insider with an influential voice and get access to exclusive content and rewards. It's your involvement as a patron that will keep all of this going and growing, so I want to thank you for your consideration in that. For more information, please check out our Patreon page through the link below at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Thanks for listening. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Shazam? Stick around and find out. Oh crap! Why is this going off right now? Oh, I already know about that. You interrupted my Shazam theme. I was trying to figure out a good theme for Shazam that would kind of sound a little bit like the old John Williams Superman theme, but would be something new. Anyway, I'll get to why a little bit later. For now, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Shazam. Did I turn that thing off for good? Okay, I think my alarm is not going to go off again. The synopsis on IMDb reads, "We all have a superhero inside us. It just takes a bit of magic to bring it out. In Billy Batson's case, by shouting out one word, Shazam, this streetwise 14-year-old foster kid can turn into the adult superhero, Captain Marvel. Dang it, Captain Marvel. Oh, freaking stupid, copyright, dumb stuff. For anyone that's not in the know, this character was known as Captain Marvel long before Marvel Comics had a character named Captain Marvel. But because of copyright lapses and stuff like that, Marvel was able to acquire the exclusive copyright to the name Captain Marvel, and eventually DC had to, I think for the best, for publishing purposes, change his name to Shazam. Anyway, that's a whole story that I don't need to get into to talk about this movie. Let's talk about the tone, the script, the basic story and vibe of this thing. I would describe it as an action superhero comedy, almost equal parts action and comedy, so lots of the two. I wouldn't say like it's an action movie with frequent comedy bits. No, I would say it is a comedy and an action movie. And it also goes for some heartfelt, warm drama now and then, but it missed the mark for me in that regard much more often than I would have liked. The tone of the script and matching performances by actors felt a bit kind of elevated from reality to me, if that makes sense. Just slightly exaggerated, just slightly theatrical. Non-action scenes, especially early on, felt very choreographed in their blocking as well. You would have like, here's a shot, and there'd be like one character would walk up here and they'd say their line, then another character would walk up here and say their line. It just felt very like stage blocking like. It didn't feel like these were characters inhabiting a room. It felt like they were actors walking to their marks and delivering their lines in a very one-note, emotional fashion, with little or no subtext that I could pick up on. There was also a moment where a woman, this is another example of like a setup moment, she's saying something and referring to something behind her, and she's like, "You're telling me that this door right here," and it's like, just the way she, without moving who she was looking at, put her hand up and put it on the door behind her. I was like, something's going to happen to her hand. It just was this big set-up type moment. It's kind of like in scary movies when suddenly you notice the camera is leaving lots of room in the background. So, to leave room for the monster to creep up in the background and pounce on the person or something like that. You can just, these little cinematic devices that I just kind of have, gotten used to. You probably have too, maybe even without even realizing it. So there was just stuff like that that felt a little bit choreographed, that I was like, I don't feel like I'm watching people. I feel like I'm watching actors, almost stage play style, making choices and stuff. It was very interesting, a little disappointing. It felt kind of like a CW style of acting, but without as much makeup, hair product, and fitted runway clothing styles. Just a little artificial somehow to me. The dialogue never consistently worked for me. I know I just jumped off into the performances a little bit and some of that stuff, but it's so related, and with what the script is doing, and the two combined kind of created the atmosphere. So, but I will talk a little bit more about two performances that I liked in a bit. The dialogue never consistently worked for me. I had trouble believing in the psychological reality of some of the foster family characters. The foster parents in particular seemed a little too smiley in a sort of artificial saccharine way. Now, I have met some really sweet people, some really wonderfully kind and compassionate people, and they don't feel the way that these people felt to me. They stand out as being unusually compassionate and loving and kind, but in a way that still somehow feels more grounded and relaxed and at ease. And these guys just smiled a little bit in a way that felt like maybe they were in a sitcom, like a 90s sitcom or something. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It just didn't feel quite right to me. The foster dad also kept calling Billy son, which added to this sort of old-fashioned vibe that I had trouble buying into in this movie. Even with the lighter tone, though, and what felt to me like oversimplistic characters, the movie does still go dark now and then, particularly when the villain shows up and brings his pseudo-demonic allies with him. There's no gore, but there's plenty of people that die screaming in this movie, and plenty of people that scream and run in terror, And these seven deadly sins that Dr. Sivana, the villain, is kind of allied with, they are like creepy demon, stereotypical demon-looking monsters, So there's definitely elements of darkness in this movie. It just doesn't stay there very long at all. But it's nice that they are willing to go there, even if it's briefly now and then. For some reason, I found myself able to accept and enjoy we're talking about psychological realism again. I found myself able to accept and enjoy the lack of psychological realism on display from the basic gag of the movie, which is this kid gets teleported to a wizard's lair and then is suddenly given an adult body with superpowers. Now, if this were more psychologically realistic, this would be a really dramatic, intense movie, as this boy is, I think in some regards, the movie Big was more psychologically realistic than the way we had the gag of kid in a grown-up body done in this movie. But I wondered if I was able to accept it more because this is a movie that is clearly part of the DC expanded or extended universe, whatever they're calling the DC movie universe. It clearly references Batman, Superman. I won't go further than that. It references some other characters, but so it clearly is set in that world. And so I'm thinking, well, it's been a while since the events of Man of Steel, which kicked off this cinematic universe. So maybe what we're seeing here is kids that kind of grew up in this environment where we do live in a world where there are crazy, underwater aliens from Aquaman, and crazy aliens from outer space and sci-fi laser guns and all kinds of stuff. They're growing up in a world where all this weird crap is possible. And so maybe, I can accept it, in that regard. If you couldn't tell, and if you're not familiar with my reviews in the past, some sense of it doesn't have to be full-blown psychological realism, or else, movies would never have any fun moments in them when they're dealing with the fantastical. But I do like some sense of what feels like psychological realism to me. And character-driven stuff is very important to me. So anyway, so I was able to, kind of accept that in some way. But there were also a lot of jokes that fell flat. This movie tonally felt, I don't want to keep comparing it to Marvel movies, but that's really the easiest comparison I could make. But I would say the difference of the humor in this movie is that, compared to what's typically seen in like Marvel-style movies, is that it's not just a bunch of wisecracks and punchlines. I mean, there are those, and those usually actually in this movie fell flat for me. The funniest moments were when they grew out of the performance of Zachary Levi, which I'll get to in a second. But there was just some other gags. Like there's this running gag with a mall Santa that totally just fell flat for me, except for the last two times I saw him. Then they did get some laughs out of me. But there was lots of these moments where they were clearly like setting up, hey, this is a funny moment. This is a funny moment. And I'm just like, this is not funny. I'm not having a good time. So anyway, lots of jokes that were clearly jokes, but just fell flat for me. But I have a weird sense of humor, so, don't read into that very much. And let's talk about the cast, though, because there's two cast members I really liked, and I really look forward to seeing more of, and it's the reason that I'll look forward to a sequel for this movie. The first is Zachary Levi, and that's the biggest reason that I'll look forward to the next movie. He really made this movie for me. He played the boy in a man's body in such a wide-eyed, endearing way that had me laughing a number of times. When the script would have done nothing for me, he made it funny by how he played the moment. Which is why I probably couldn't quote for you any funny punchlines from this movie, because for me, it wasn't the punchlines that ever, well, I don't want to say ever, but hardly ever made this movie funny. It was the character-based humor that grew out of Levi's performance. This gag of a kid in a man's body, you know. And I also want to compliment Jack Dylan Grazer. He played Freddie Freeman. I don't remember seeing this actor in anything else prior to this. I really bought into him as this loudmouth chatterbox, and honestly, I found him a little bit obnoxious because of that. I was like, oh man, I wonder if he's a bit like that in real life, because I'm really getting like a legit loudmouth chatterbox junior hire vibe from this guy, and it's like getting on my nerves just a little bit. But first, that fed the reality of the character for me, and second, he had enough moments of vulnerability that pierced beyond the chatterbox smart aleck persona to help me really care about him as a character. One scene in particular has him opening up emotionally about how people treat him and how people perceive him, and it just wonderfully sets up a payoff near the end of the movie that made my eyes start to well up on behalf of his character. I really look forward to seeing more of these two characters in particular, with a script that hopefully will connect with me better. As far as stunts and visuals, this is no Aquaman. That's not to say that I think the effects in Aquaman are great. I just mean that they're all over the place and very, very frequent. That's not what this movie is. It doesn't really open up to the potential of Shazam's powers in action scenes. You know, this is a character that has Superman-level powers. But after seeing Man of Steel, a movie about Superman that, like, I mean, which just had crazy Avengers movie level spectacle going on all over the place in that movie, this felt very small scale in comparison, you know, but that's not necessarily a criticism, because this is largely a comedy, and so they were giving lots of time to these grounded comedic moments as he's discovering his powers. You know, it all makes sense. For what this movie is, I didn't need or expect, you know, more constant spectacle going on. I'd like that in a follow-up movie that could also bring the character and humor that this movie had into it, but and maybe they'll have more budget, you know, after having a successful movie here, which I imagine this one will be. But anyway, this is, it's largely a comedy, not a full-on action movie. I wouldn't call it a visual spectacle like we're used to in many recent superhero movies. Okay, I don't usually comment on the music and sound, but I do want to mention that I never really heard a theme clearly established for Shazam, and that's more common in superhero movies today. It's much more common to have a superhero movie that doesn't have like a clear theme that is trumpeted or whatever sounded when the hero is doing their hero thing, and you know, and that's fine, but Shazam is such a traditional, old-fashioned type of character concept. The costume is very old-fashioned, you know. I can almost imagine that this would be what comes out of the subconscious of a superhero, you know, a comic book kid, you know, a comic book fan kid's imagination. And so I felt like they could have, if they wanted to, really embraced, you know, that comic booky self-awareness in a way by having an old-fashioned theme that's in the style of the John Williams Superman theme, but also could be potentially reworked, reorchestrated for some serious moments too. But maybe we'll see a more clearly defined theme next time. Maybe not. That's just a minor point. It's not really that big of a deal. Okay, so themes. Are there any moral, philosophical, spiritual themes being played with in this movie that might stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation? Maybe. There's a couple that could have, you know, gone somewhere but didn't. The first is that, you know, the villain, Dr. Sivana, uses the power of the quote-unquote 7 deadly sins to combat Shazam. The sins are creatures. They're not sins in the sense that the Bible, when the Bible describes sins, they are not these creatures that are manipulating mankind. I mean, that's demons would be the closest thing to that. But sins are these acts, these things that we do that divert from God's intentions for us. So, but they're personified here, and possibly, they're stereotypical demon-like looking, but their nature is never explained. Are they the cause of their, namesake sins in the world? Are they going around and influencing people to be greedy and slothful and all these kinds of things? That nature was never really explored, and so, there's maybe a missed opportunity there to do something interesting thematically. The foster parents have a tradition of some sort of vague prayer before they eat. The focus during that seems to be more on each other. I mean, they have their eyes open and they're smiling and looking at each other while they say this kind of light content prayer. The prayer doesn't seem to really have a focus on God, but it is a prayer of thanks each time. So I was curious who they're thanking for these blessings in their life. It had some faint trappings of Christian tradition. And in my church alone, I know at least a handful of people who have fostered and adopted. So fostering is possibly a more common pursuit among Christians. Maybe that's why they wanted to bring some kind of a faith angle in there, because a lot of foster parents are Christians. I don't know. But this family was never clearly identified that way, so there's not much to comment on. I'd say the main theme was that of living selflessly in community or in family with others. Billy starts out using his powers to carry out fantasies and to win the approval of others, and there's a lot of comedy that comes out of that. He's extremely self-absorbed and superficial. In fact, I wonder why the wizard's spell, who was meant to go out and search for someone who is pure of heart to have these powers, I wonder why that spell didn't find his far more pure of heart, quote-unquote, foster sister Darla, who is just kind of like a little angel of a girl, So that was a little bit unusual. But anyway, Billy eventually realizes that not only does he have a responsibility to help others, but he has a responsibility to be in vulnerable, sharing relationships with others and with a family. So, and I think as geeks, and certainly for this geek right here, it's so easy to stay caught up in, my own little thought life, where I'm the main character of my own kind of little story in my head in pursuit of significance and hero moments to define myself in the context of my interactions with others. The focus is very much on me, and my little story that I have going on in life, But this movie provides, I think, a good reminder that we really reach our greatest potential when we are generously sharing life with others in our families and in our communities. And specifically, I would point to what church community, the local church body, is meant to be like in deepening relationships with each other. So anyway, I thought that was a nice point of the movie. I have no idea what your taste in movies are, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, okay, skip, but buy. Skip it for now, buy it on Blu-ray later on. You're going to enjoy this enough, you'll enjoy enough scenes in this to want to see it and want to have it in your DC movie collection. And it's definitely one that you're going to want to watch with your boys at some point. In the meantime, something much closer to your tastes in action superhero comedy would be Season 2 of The Tick, which just came out on Amazon Prime. So go spend time watching that. You can wait on this one. Shazam is rated PG-13 for intense sequences of action, language, and suggestive material. Oh, yeah, before I forget, I'm going to be experimenting with doing some kind of spoiler content for my reviews, thanks to a suggestion from Tim O'Donnell. And so you can look for that on our Patreon page at patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions. I'll be letting our patrons there kind of get a taste of what that is going to be, and we'll see what I decide to do with it in the long term, but I'm in an experimental phase right now. But very soon, probably sometime this weekend, I will be posting my spoiler thoughts about Shazam. But right now, I'd like to take some time to write a tune for pre-made rhyme. The lyrics kind of never change, but the melody gets rearranged. I never know what I'll create to say how much I appreciate barbells and joysticks, Libre and Stefan Kremik. Thank you for supporting me and SBP and CGC. And now to all who hear this tune, thank you as well. Please come back soon. Want to hear your name and song? Check out our page on Patreon. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. And like, share, subscribe. I'd appreciate that. Anything you want to do to help get the word out, spread this content to other people, I'd be really grateful for that. And then I hope you'll join us over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
christiangeekcentral.com